Ernest Hemingway's fable, published in 1952, for which he's really known. His reputation, I think, to some extent, rests upon this work. And I think it's been read by generations of young people at high school, and older people, younger people. It crosses generations. And it has these two characters, the old man and the young boy and the sea. And I think of it very much as a sort of triangular relationship between man, boy, and sea. And at the heart of it, there's a contest between the old man and the sea. There's a competition. There's a struggle for supremacy. And it's a physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual struggle. But it's not it's not unkind, it's not cruel. There's something very tender and loving about the relationship between the man and the sea. Almost as though they are in a romance together. This is a romantic novella. This is a romantic work of art. There is love, there is tenderness, there is flesh, there is sin, there is touch, there is sorrow, there is loss. All the things we think of as being romantic. It's here in this novella.
Absolutely.
I'll give you a small part, and then I'll come back to what I mean by a fable and the reason why I think it's endured and why it's lasted for so long.
Sounds good.
In the dark, the old man could feel the morning coming. In the dark, the old man could feel the morning coming, and as he rowed, he heard the trembling sound as flying fish left the water, and the hissing that their stiff set wings made as they soared away in the darkness. Now, I'm just going to stop there for a minute, Gabriel, because there's something about the atmosphere of Hemingway's lines here that remind me of the beginning of the book of Genesis, the first book in the Bible, the creations.
That's that's a really interesting comparison. Let's hear what you have to say.
So, it's the story of creation. God makes the world out of darkness. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, etc. And it's a very commanding statement. It's a statement of obedience and command. God made the world out of words, but he also made the world out of darkness. We start in the book of Genesis with the image of darkness, and out of darkness comes light, comes life, come people, come the water, the ocean, the land, the earth, the sun, the sky. Human beings come actually after animals. Human beings come to care for animals. They are the guardian. They're the parents, if you like, of the natural world. They are to be responsible for the natural world. But there's the same quality of atmosphere in this sentence, and I'll read it again. And it comes out of darkness. There's something about the texture of darkness, of the old man at night on the ocean, off the coast of Cuba. He's left Cuba behind. He's left Havana. He's left the boy, who is in some sense, his equivalent of a son, his family, his reference point to the social world, and he's descended into a place of darkness. In the dark, the old man could feel the morning coming, and as he rowed, he heard the trembling sound. Flying fish left the water, hissing that their stiff, set wings made as they soared away in the darkness. So we start with dark and end with darkness. Darkness is a state, it's a mental, spiritual, emotional state. The old man has to survive the darkness. And I wonder what you thought darkness was here, Gabriel. Any thoughts on that? What is the darkness? What does it mean? What does it symbolize?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, it's just turning from night to day, but I think what more it means for that, I think at this moment, he stayed one night over on the water. I don't remember if it was one or two, but he's been in this battle right? And I think that in this scene, the darkness and the tensity that brings is his struggle and his battle with the massive marlin, and also with being alone out at sea by himself, that mental, not only physical, but that mental battle as well. So I think that because darkness in a context, opens up as this, it's always in this, most of the time in this negative limelight, and it's displayed poorly. It opens us up as the reader to see that Hemingway isn't just dealing, or the old man in the sea isn't just dealing with, like I said, that physical struggle. There's that mental struggle there for him to deal with what he's going through on the water, and I think that that's what the darkness represents here.
Yes, I think you're right, Gabriel. It's the mind of the old man too, isn't it? So when we read in the dark, we're also inside his mind. So the mind and the water, the sea and the sky, they all come together to produce this mental state and this mental space. And almost as though somehow the old man has created the world in his mind, as God created the world from darkness at the beginning of the book of Genesis. And then we have this lovely unfolding of a creation narrative, a creation story, where he starts to hear through his senses the hissing of the flying fish leaving the water and spreading out their wings through the darkness. He can't see them, he can only hear them. And then we start to hear about the things that he has feeling for and affection. He was very fond of flying fish. He was very fond of flying fish, as they were his principal friends on the ocean. He was sorry for the birds, especially the small, delicate, dark terns that were always flying and looking and almost never finding, and he thought, the birds have a harder life than we do. Except for the robber birds and the heavy, strong ones. Why did they make birds so delicate and fine as those sea swallows when the ocean can be so cruel? She is kind and very beautiful, but she can be so cruel, and it comes so suddenly, and such birds that fly, dipping and hunting with their small, sad voices. Their small, sad voices are made too delicately for the sea too delicately for the sea. And there's this lovely disquisition here, Gabriel. He's talking to himself out loud inside his own mind. So it's self-address. It's the old man in the middle of the night speaking to the birds, but also to the sea. And he's discussing the quality of delicacy. Why are these birds made so delicate and fine when the ocean can be so cruel? And the ocean is suddenly transformed into something like a being, a feminine being, a woman. She is kind and very beautiful. And there's almost a sort of a seduction scene here. It's almost as though we're in the middle of an erotic, romantic seduction. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I think it ties further back into the theme of romanticizing the sea itself and his journey out at the sea. I think the other thing that like the second half of that paragraph in that passage, we were discussing, there's that the examples of darkness in that first sentence there, and I think when he's because I picture this happening, right? I picture Santiago, the old man, in the sea, and I picture him looking up at the stars and looking at birds, and I think because of his understanding of his own vulnerability in the moment, being that he's alone at sea, he's older, it's darker out. I think that him discussing the birds' vulnerability and their delicacy in such a vast body of the ocean is really a way for him to present his understanding and his awareness of his own vulnerability. And I think
yes, that's right, Gabriel. I think that's exactly what's happening. I think that's very precisely correct, what you've just said. So in some sense, his body, his small, frail, aging, hungry body joins with the frailty and the delicacy of the flying fish birds, right?
Exactly.
I like the way that flying fish and birds have somehow merged together here. There's almost a mythic quality to this moment where the animals themselves are changing state. Are they fish? Are they birds?
Right.
Who's flying?
Right.
And then the next paragraph, it becomes much more human. We move slightly away from the animal world to the world of man and woman, as you do in the book of Genesis towards the end of that opening passage that I was trying to summarize. He always thought of the sea as la mar, which is what people call her in Spanish when they love her. Sometimes those who love her say bad things of her, but they are always said as though she were a woman. La mar, la mar. Some of the younger fishermen, those who used buoys as floats for their lines and had motorboats, bought when the shark livers had bought much more money, spoke of her as El Mar, which is masculine. They spoke of her as a contestant, or a place, or even an enemy. So there we have that sense of the struggle, the battle, to use your word, Gabriel. You said battle earlier. That's, I think, quite right. The Greeks had a word for it. 5th century, classical Greek world, celebration of the body. They used to call their form of contestation or their form of competition, often what we would call nowadays, I suppose, a match. We'd call it a match. The Greeks called it an agon, A-G-O-N, and the root of the word agony comes from agon.
Well, that's very interesting.
Sorry, go ahead, Gabriel.
No, I was saying that's very interesting. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, it's fine. I mean, when I hear the word agon and agony, I see muscles straining, I see the fibers of the body, I see the blood cells, I see muscles popping out of the body. And I believe, Gabriel, you have a background in sport as well, so you must have some memories of body memory, if you like, and muscle memory of your body working almost too hard.
Definitely.
Almost straining.
Definitely, yeah, no, definitely. I think in this passage, what I really I think what I like about it is it shows it's further adding on to what you've said about the old man's kind of how he views the sea. He views it as this almost like a living body and beautiful creature, and he's aware of its power, but he, at the same time, while he might be a little bit frightened of it, it's not, he doesn't resent the ocean for its power or the sea for its power, for her power. He instead embraces it, and he ventures into the relationship with it with an understanding of that power. Whereas I think at the second half of this paragraph, what was interesting to me was how he explained that some of the younger fishermen referred to the sea as Elmar, the masculine tense, and they spoke of her as a contestant or a place or even an enemy. I thought was really interesting because I think that really shows the difference between the way Santiago, the old man, looks at the sea and the way that other people do, and that even further shows his appreciation for that relationship he has with the sea.
I think you're right, and appreciation is a good word. This is a passage of appreciation and of acceptance, actually. The old man always thought of her as feminine and as something that gave or withheld great favours. And if she did wild or wicked things, it was because she could not help them. So we shift away from the masculine, which is the part you've just read out loud, El Mar, back to the feminine. And there's this lovely ebb and flow between masculine component, the contest, the self that would have an enemy, that requires an opponent, that requires a task or a quest, something super heroic, some kind of quest narrative, some end point or goal, we would say in the language of sport. And let's not forget that sport frames this story as well, Gabriel, because we had the mention earlier in the novella of Joe DiMaggio, who is the great super heroic baseball player of the 1950s, who is mentioned by Hemingway's narrator more than once in discussion with the boy, I believe, before he sets out to sea. Right, we have this very contemporary reference, and I wonder what you thought of that slice of culture suddenly entering into the story. What does it do to you as a reader? What does it do for you?
I think the primary effect that it has on me is that it makes me remember that, this was, it's kind of like this is when this was written for me. And at the same time, I think that, Hemingway offering Joe DiMaggio as a hero for him kind of makes us remember that, at least to me, it makes us feel that, we're all people, right? So when the old man Santiago goes out to the sea and he's struggling, he gets his mind off of things by thinking about his hero and who he looks up to. And I think that helps him get through his turmoil and his struggle. And
Yes.
I thought it was extremely interesting that Hemingway picked, a contemporary baseball player. I just thought that obviously it could have been anybody else. I thought that it was interesting that he picked Joe DiMaggio. But yeah, no, I think that it really, I think it personalizes the novel a lot more and the story a lot more, to the point
Yes,
where
absolutely.
the reader
I think
can.
that.
I'm sorry?
No, that's right, Gabriel. Sorry, I interrupt you. I think that's right. And it brings us right into the American 20th century. It positions us right in the heart of American culture, sports culture, entertainment culture. The 20th century post-war, we're in 52, remember, in terms of the novella being published. It was
Right.
published in 1952. We're in the middle of the American century, and what do we find in the middle of the American century? We find sport. We find the sporty male as the contemporary version of the American hero.
Right.
So it brings us right into the center of American culture and of history. It locates us in time and place. And it takes me back to the idea of the contestant, the place, and the enemy. That's really what, classically speaking, a match is. Joe DiMaggio is the equivalent of the modern day match, and we move suddenly out of the universal abstract morass of space and time, which is the vastness of the sea, which we've likened to Genesis, the beginning of creation, the beginning of the world, and we're suddenly in a moment in time inside America. So there's that, and I think that's really what the fable does. It moves us back and forth between abstractions, philosophical abstractions and searches and quests for truth and knowledge. So the darkness there is also coming into knowledge, coming into light, coming into understanding. But then we also, at the same time, are tethered to a point in time, so the early 1950s, to a Joe DiMaggio match. And we hear Santiago, the old man, earlier on, before he departs to go out to sea, we hear him sharing his love of DiMaggio and his success, and his prowess, and his favor, if you like. His
Absolutely.
favor, meaning his reputation with the boy. He's like, hey boy, there's Joe DiMaggio.
Right. Dr. Bayley, I'm sitting here, I'm looking at the time that I've been recording audio. We have about 2 to 3 more minutes, so I don't think we can get into that second passage, but if there are any points or kind of wrap-ups that you'd like to present, feel free to do so now for the next couple of minutes.
So I just wanted to just very briefly explain what a fable is, because I looked up the root of the word, Gabriel, a couple of times, and it's quite a perplexing word, fable. It comes from the Latin, fabula, and the Old French, and fabula means a fabulous story. A story that enchants and engrosses and lures and draws us in, that is based partly on untruths, things that are made up, spoken language that is incredible, stories and tales and narratives that aren't necessarily true, that are slightly preposterous and misleading, that tell lies. At the same time, if you look at the root of the word, it comes quite close to the idea of speaking the truth as well. So there's a strange split in the understanding of what a fable is and what it can do. It comes from the word to speak as well, just speaking, but speaking with a sense of also coming into some understanding of what a truth might mean. A truth meaning something that we can learn from, an experience, a story that grants us an experience from which we can learn. And of course, the old man, Santiago, goes out to sea to catch an enormous fish. And what is it that he learns? He learns the limits of his physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual endurance. So there is a lesson, right? This is also a story that grants him a lesson. At the same time, it's a fabulous tale. It's a tale that also produces something that we can't quite get a hold of. Things that may or may not be true. Things that slip around like the fish, that fall away from our grasp, that we can't quite hold down.
It's really interesting. You know, it is really cool to see how, you know, we can bring the understanding of that into why there is this massive appreciation for this short but impactful story by Hemingway. I think that's very interesting.
I think it will last. I think it will continue.